So no problem. I want to go through a few things. This bell down here is the Story Bell. That's where my mother, my little sister owns the property now, and I've not done the archaeology on it, but I'm looking forward to it. And I may dig up the privies there and find out what we were all doing in 1930, 1920. But where the bell came from, that's where my mother and nearly all the Statons, Teddy, Dale, Virginia, the Hunters, where we all went to school. Then they built a new school down to the side of the road, and that's where me and all my brothers and sisters went to school. And this is the bell that came out of that school, which we are trying to preserve. And of course, you've seen my sister's the spinning wheel and weasel. I dug it out of a chicken house when I was 14, covered with chicken manure and everything. And I hated to lose it, and I restored it when I was about 15, 16, 17, and put it back together. And then after putting it back together, I had to research, find parts here and everything. Some of them, the spinning wheels, mostly original. The weasel, I had to do some parts and everything. But I did the research in the barns and outbuildings and found the pieces and copied them. And Dr. Franklin, who was up here previously, was talking about science and observation. And I was just down at the creek, and I looked over in the creek, and I saw two cables. And I traced them back and everything, and they are the big rains we had just washed them out. I hadn't seen them for years, and I'm very familiar with the creeks and everything. But they're the cables that used to have the swinging bridge across right here that we all played on when we were kids. Before the new bridges, when the water got up, you had to have the swinging bridge because the people on that side of the creek could not get to this side of the creek. Wayne could get down here, but we couldn't. You know, he'd just come down the hill. But I saw those cables, and it just it brought those pictures and visions that I had playing on the swinging bridge when we were all kids here. And me looking down into the water, which the water fascinated me my whole life. I was just down at that bridge, and the minnow are all up eating the gnats and the mosquitoes right now. But staring into a pool is a study. Feel free to get up, walk, come look at these rocks. If you have a question, ask me. I'm just going to ramble on about things and this, but I was fascinated as a child when I found my first, about 8 years old. After we came back from Kansas, of course, Dad put us to work farming, and then I found my first arrowhead, and that was the ruination. But all these rocks that are on the top are all Indian Creek rocks in flint that's indigenous to this area. They're flints and they're resources and everything. But I started collecting, and in cohorts with Derek Stockton and a bunch of friends, Pinky Beans and John Bowles, Rudy Thomas, people I've dealt with over the years. We had great avocational archaeologists during my time as a kid. We had Butch Ferguson, Gene Piercey, Leonard Smith, people that had the same disease as I did, you know, is trying to study what was here before me. How could I go dig? Who were these people?
We actually had archaeologists come down and we entertained them. Yeah.
Well, I've sponsored a few digs in the county, some of the first ever done with UK and with different universities where I've invited them here to dig with us and everything. But that way we get logged a little better and a little better information at UK and things. Which I have a niece that's a professor at UK right now. But these are all what I call them is antique art. These people that Stone Age man. His medium was stone. And he, of course, being, that's all he had, he got very much of an expert with his flints. Now, all your flints are quartzites. They're all formed inclusionary in limestone. So the Appalachian Mountains here were formed about 400 million years ago. And what it did, it pushed up a lot of old sea bottom. And the crinoids in things, in the urchins and things that was in the sea, is what made the crystalline formation of the quartzite grow, inclusionary in limestone. The limestone was all sedimentary, settled at the bottom of the sea, and then with the upthrust of the Appalachian Mountains, and then the higher levels were all sandstone, because the sand was on top of the old pressurized limestone that was farther down. And so all of his resource, his flint, was inclusionary in limestone, which means you have the nicest, beautiful nodules and layers of quartzite, which quartzite really just grows. It's a crystal formation. And it made all these flint too. Flint and your quartzite is unique, that it's really the sharpest substance that we know of in nature. It breaks and naps down to one molecule. It's sharper than any surgeon's scalpel. I do demonstrate that. I'm not equipped to do it today, of napping flint, showing how really sharp flint is when it's managed in a proper way. But as I got older, I had a thirst for placing these things. You know, who was this man and who was that man, and how come his pieces and parts are different than these people? And of course, historically, man mastered fire 100,000 years ago. He walked around and mastered sparks and mastered sparks. And it took him almost 90,000 years to develop agriculture. He had fire for 100,000 years before he developed hardly any other technology. And why is this? When you think about it, of course, that was an event horizon, was the fire. Man mastering fire. It's an event horizon. It changes everything. And so he went on for 100,000 years. He knew how to manage fire, how to keep fire, and eventually learned how to make fire. And but it took him 100,000 years to start defining tools as we know it now. He had fire before he had much other technology, but his event horizon was mastering fire. And that it changed him. It changed him totally. It's a whole different world. And so he went 100,000 years, and now if you can imagine in what's happened, it took him 100,000 years just to develop agriculture, to start being a husbandry of plants and animals. He didn't domesticate animals. He just hunted them and used them. But now in this last 10,000 years, you have to think of what have we done? What has happened to us? We have event horizons every day from the internet to nuclear energy to everything, and it makes you think as a bit of a scientist and as a historian, what are we in store for? What is coming next? If it took 100,000 years with fire to develop any other technology. So 20,000 years ago, we got all these things. We started having technologies, tool technologies, which just like the bow and arrow, which it wasn't introduced to America until about 2,000 years ago, about the time of Christ. Of course, in Europe, it was there a lot earlier. And what we call the European and North African, their archaic period and Paleolithic period dates back earlier than the Americas. But for 20,000 years, he used what's called a dart point. And it developed from no fletching on up to where he fletched it and he learned it. And then he developed the force multiplier, the Adena. And he could take this, and the average man can throw it 100 yards. A good, with a little practice, you can throw it a football field. And the world record's like 200 yards. That people build these things that can throw them 2 football fields. And they fly straight and true and everything. But as I mentioned before, the DeSoto, he didn't mind the bow and arrows. He had armor and chainmail. But these things thrown off the bank of the Mississippi down on your ship, it has a lot of inertia. You know, it penetrates. It can hurt you. But Catlin, a great artist or Western artist, he made observations. He saw the Cheyenne Indians playing out on the plains and everything, and he saw 6 years old with their little bows. And he documented this and wrote it down and says they were standing at 60 feet and hitting something the size of a quarter with their little bitty bows and arrows. So even like with this Adena, they became very accurate with it because it was their highest technology. Like Joey over there and his rifle, you know, that's what they did. They practiced, they trained, and they became experts. And you think about it. But at that time period, the flora and the fauna, we didn't have loud guns, we didn't make big noises. We kind of lived with them. So it was pretty easy with Adena to go up to a herd of elk or a herd of buffalo and stick them till you could eat them, you know, till you could clean them. But Rudy, of course, we kind of got introduced to archaeology at the same time. Maybe he was a forebearer for me. But I remember in his things we can't get away with today, is that on his desk when he taught German up at the old high school, he had a skull, an Indian skull on his desk, which wouldn't go over good now with the new graveyard act in Kentucky. But those were things that we did without thought. We didn't think much about, I guess we didn't have guilt, I don't know. But we went ahead there, hunger for information and stuff. We done this, but I've studied my whole life. All of these come from Indian creatures. This is how rich the archaeology is here. Real close. This big benton here I found on Mother's Day, 1972. But unless you're a collector, you don't understand the draw, the things. These things here, of course, Derek and I and all of us, we did a dig, and 7 of these boards here all these artifacts came within 10 feet of each other, 20 feet of each other. It's called a tail or a midden. And this is not in under a shelter, it's out in front of a natural shelter where everything got pushed out for 20,000 years. Buried. It's called your tail or your midden. It's just a pile of stuff that you over there. But how many times have you lost a pocket knife in your life? I could hundreds. I've lost 100 pocket knives in my life. And I always thought about this. Why did he leave this beautiful piece of work, this artwork? Where did it come from? But if that's your life, you know, they're left. Some of them are ceremonially left, and some of them are not. But they're here underground, and the great thing about the flint is it was formed over 400 million years ago. So it does time pretty good. The flint does time. The flint at a Rockwell hardness scale of about 7.8, it'll scratch your best tool steel. And so it's oblivious to chemicals, to the only thing that really destroys flint is sunlight. If it's exposed to the sun, it will degrade. But buried in earth, I find pieces here 5 foot down that was left there 12,000 years ago. You pull it out, it's like it was just made. You know, but it's in the earth without the sun. But the sun will patinate and dissolve. Enough sun, just dissolve flint out. But some of these pieces are just works of art, just incredible pieces. And the skill and the craft to know them and make them, that was their technology. You know, we talk about all their technologies now, but a man that mastered flint knapping and manufacturing and geology, knowing his good stones from his bad stones, his weak stones, the characteristics, it was very sought after. A lot of people think that Indians, everybody could nap flint, they could. Napping flint is a very refined craft and skill. And so I differ with some of my learned scholar friends about this, and you know, science is done through observation. So you just sit, look, study, look, study, you learn. But I have found sites where flint knappers live. And it's obvious doing that, of course, this is time consuming to do a 5-foot layer of stratigraphy, all your layers, trying to understand it, doing your study on it. It's hard to understand. But it was also a trade as a guild. If someone wanted to be a master flint knapper, he'd have to observe a master's work. And so there are places here right on this creek, and we're very lucky in that we have the most incredible flint here in the world. We have our Fort Payne, we have our St. Genevieve, we have our Boyle Church, we have our Warsaw flint, we have our St. Louis flint, and all these flints are named after limestone formation. If you've ever drilled oil, if you know anything about that business, all of our flints come from inclusionary to inclusionary in a limestone formation. And with the upheaval that formed the Appalachian Mountains, it gave us a cross-section of this. The upheaval there gave us a cross-section of the sedimentary limestone that was at the bottom of the ocean. And so we had all of that, but here we're so blessed. But in this one side I dug, there was a little outcrop of stone, and all around it was exhausted pieces. Most of these things, 90% of them are not arrowheads and not a dart point. They were knives. A person, he kept his knife. He resharpened it just like we sharpen our knife. All of these larger pieces, these Lost Lakes, Dalton, Pine Tree, Hardin Barbed, Bentons. Bentons weren't. I'll have to talk to you all about Bentons. I meander around quite a bit. But the Benton, about 5,000 years ago, is the Benton. And believe it or not, on our Benton points, we don't see any sign of usage. No resharpening, very little. Every once in a while we find it. But they was the first hire. The people 5,000 years ago that made these points, which I found this on Mother's Day, 1972, in the tobacco patch at Paul's. And it makes you wonder, why are these different? Your previous arrowheads, your pine trees, your Lost Lakes, and everything, they show great signs of use. So, this is a Lost Lake. You see the bevel, the twist to this? That's because he resharpened it all the time. He just sat here with a pressure napper, put a new edge on it, go back to work. But this was always short hafted. It had a handle. And all your bigger points, they were short hafted. They were their knives. Personal defense, whatever. They kept them razor sharp. Razor sharp. And this arrowhead was that broad and that long when it's originally made, but it's exhausting down. It's being exhausted. But in our experiment, you can take that Lost Lake, hafted right. I can butcher out, I can cape out a elk in no time. No other tool. I don't need anything else. I can cape it out. I can hide it. I can cut the sinews out of it. I can backstrap it. I can break it right down, and I can flay it all out with that one stone. Nothing else, sitting right there. Better than really what we have now. But that flint, it breaks. It naps down to one molecule, and you had a lot more craft then. They use a very light touch in using it. You just don't force it. You don't push it. It does the work. You let your sharpening do the work, and not, you think, well, that would break and fracture off. No. If the material you're working is softer than it depends upon your craft, how well the thing works. But we've all dug since the Leonard Smiths, the Butch Person, the Gene Pierceys, which we caught the disease from those older people, digging it under. Mainly they dug it under shelters, and we did surface finds. Our agriculture, you go to a plowed field, there lays something that you know is man-made. You know, it doesn't fit in with the other rocks. And it'll draw your attention. Thoreau wrote about finding his first arrowhead. He wrote about it, and it affected his philosophy in life on Walden Pond and everything. But when he was a child, he commented about following the mule and finding these arrowheads, and it just put him thoughts in his mind about how old were they, how long, who were these people. By that time, the Indians didn't fool much with flint. In Thoreau's time, they'd all gone to their trading. Now me, I like pre-Columbian artifacts instead. After close encounters of the third kind for the Indian, after they met the Spanish and Columbus and everything, they were very different people than they were the majority of the people that lived here. But the post-Columbian people just is that much of what the American Indian was, or the indigenous people. There was a whole life there without the worries that we brought on them, or the diseases, or anything else but that's what always fascinated me. Who were these people before us? You know, and that's what I like to do in my archaeology and my timelines, is try to understand how his stone technology developed and how he used it. And but I was telling you about the Benton, the Big Benton first hierarchy. This thing was mounted on a stick to scare the kids. But the Benton culture was the first culture that we know of that they did ceremonial burying with artifacts. And you figure they just used that big spear to scare the kids or get boats or something. You know what I mean? Because they were a hierarchy. And before that, the hunter-gatherer, he didn't have much of a hierarchy. Because the hunter-gatherer, he was very family-oriented. You know what I mean? He didn't have the body politic that the Benton person did. But the Benton person started doing stuff. He started building structures and platforms, and he buried ceremonially with the banner stone and the Benton part and everything. And so he became the first, as we know, as a chieftain or a ruler. But before that, in your archaic period, we don't see any sign of that. The things we find, very little ceremony about them. They were all tools. They were just practical tools. Back to your Clovis and your Thebes complex and your any other thing than what they were meant for, what they were made for. But the Benton culture in the Americas changed that. It turned into them. We started seeing towns and cities, and the Benton people started developing sedentary lifestyles, agriculture. But in people ask me, well, how do you know? How do you know where to look? The Indian has still left so much here for us to read his sign. Of course, in the Indian, you had to read signs to survive. You have to read Mother Nature very close, or it don't work out well. And so you have to understand the clockwork of nature. You have to understand what goes on. And they were around a good Indian rock site, but this is mainly in are better preserved forest areas. All you have to do is look around the trees. The trees will tell you exactly what the site is. Right around, immediately around a little rock shelter or a site in the woods, you can pick out the trees. The nut-bearing trees all around you. There'll be the buckeye, there'll be the hickory nut, there'll be the walnut, there'll be the pawpaw. Down in the bottoms of the creek, there'll be the wild rice. This was his, he carried them in, put them down, and they grew back. And so there's always a stand of walnut and a stand of pawpaw. The pawpaw tree was unique to this area. Most people don't know what it was good for. Some people like pawpaws, some people don't. But the pawpaw is the only fibrous tree we have. You can take a pawpaw and cut it at the bottom and rip you a piece of bark that goes all the way to the top. And you can take it, soak it in water, hammer it, and you've got long fibers. Matter of fact, the pawpaw tree, we build structures with pawpaw only as lashing. You can take and strip the bark off a pawpaw tree, you can wrap it around your two poles that you put together, tie it off, let it dry, it shrinks just like leather, bingo, you've got it. And it just, however strong you want is how much you wrap the pawpaw bark around. But in the bottoms where a lot of these were found and dug, right there's the pawpaw tree, right there's the walnut tree. And you go out in your general wood population, and out here you'll have a stand of white oak. You'll have a stand of walnut. You'll have a stand here. And the reason you have a stand is that's the nut that doesn't fall far from the tree. And so they grow like this. But of course your poplars and your maples, maple trees, they're different. They're airborne. You know what I mean? They go where they want to. But around the Indian rock site, as a archaeologist and an anthropologist, all you do is got to go up there and observe. And it'll tell you whether they were there much or whether they were not by the flora around the site, because it's still there. The flora hadn't left. Then he brought in, and all their edible plants will be there. All the things will be right around. Even in the woods, which is scary, they brought these seeds into the forested areas that normally grow out in the savannas, but they kept bringing them in so many times that the plants even adapted to the lower light levels around these things. And it's just incredible for me, after I understood this, that I can walk up there and look around and say, yeah, the Indians lived here sometime because they just really drug in a lot of stuff. And this dates back to 8,000 years that the same people's there, the same plants, the stuff that they ate and what they wanted. That was your hunter-gatherer period. And then they eventually learned to plant their own seeds. And then the waterways were everything for them, because what made agriculture in their area feasible? What made it feasible? Their creeks. If you go down Cumberland River, where Willis Creek goes into, where Crocus Creek goes into, right there, they were huge towns of Indians, starting about the time of Christ, or a little after that. And what the Indian did, he did fish weirs. He learned that in the spring here, we have our annual spring flood. The creeks rise. The Indians, and they had the greatest building material in the world, they had a cane. They had a river cane here, and they would build fish weirs with their cane. They'd weave them. And when they'd sit around and wait before they put their weirs in, and then when they saw that the rains were over and the creek was starting to recede, of course, unbeknown to the fish, that was where they migrated up the creeks to spawn, and the Indian trapped them in there and put up fish weirs. Right down here at Irish Bottom, it's incredible what you can learn down there, because Willis Creek comes up through there. It flooded every year. Crocus Creek is incredible too, because it goes a long way. Marrowbone Creek, I don't even want to talk about it, what went on there in the agricultural period of the Indians, because they would dam it up and they'd use a seine or a fish weir to stop the fish from coming down all summer long. They had their own refrigerator, their own pool of fish there. They took them, smoked fish, ate fish, but what they did, they fertilized with the fish. Fish and corn went, and squash and things went hand in hand. And the American Indian taught English and everybody that. All you have to do to grow a good ear of corn is take a little old bluegill that long, put it down the hole, plant the seed on top of it, you fertilize out the whole year. You got your calcium, you got your trace elements, you got everything there. That the fish wouldn't give it up for you. And you got, but you got that from the using their creeks, damming them up, and I mean, they have life made. Life in nature is not as hard as you think, because Mother Nature is abundant. As a general, we have droughts, we have famines, we have everything, but Mother Nature, for the average Joe, everything's in that creek right there and right beside it you'll ever need in your life. You know. And we find that a lot of people talk about big game and the Indian killing big game. In our bone analysis, in our shelters and in our caves and everything, he killed some. It was a big deal and everything. It fed the family a lot, but he's like us. He'd sooner eat a bird, a rabbit, some of the smaller game, so much handier, not near as dangerous as killing a grown buffalo, and didn't have the mortality rate that we do. But if y'all want to come up and look at these rocks and think, I've got more down here stuff to say, just you know, come look at them. If you want to, ask me questions.
We got about 20 minutes before we have to have the next one, so take
Well,
your
what
time.
I'm saying, everybody just come look at the rocks, do that. I can go on to other spills and everything, but I won't do the timelines and stuff like that.
Thank you, Terry.
But these are the Indian Creek pearls that have been found right on this creek.